First of all, welcome along to reboothousing.nz. The purpose of this expo was to really help out the industry, create some market insights to what's going on, but also help out different exhibitors who are here. And we've got exhibitors now from all across the country, from Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, Tauranga, Featherston, all over the place. So it's wonderful to have them here and help support them. So we do encourage everyone to go along and visit the different exhibition stands that are taking place. So this is a 100% free virtual expo. First time it's ever happened that we're aware of in New Zealand's history. And I guess it's a reflection of these such different times that we're living in under COVID-19. So we're delighted to have Bill Smale. Bill Smale is Queen's Services Medal Award winner. Bill is part of this Smales farm development, and so if you're from Auckland, you'll be very familiar with that massive urban design project and business district that's up there in Smales Farm, which is part of your family heritage. And also runs a number of freedom lifestyle villages as well. And I sometimes jokingly say to Bill that you must be proud to be named after a bus stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been a great marketing tool. Everybody knows where the station is, so it's pretty good.
Great to have you here, Bill. I'm looking forward to your speech. Frank Hsu, and Frank is the Managing Director of Shore Capital, Property Development and Financing. And when Frank and I had a quick conversation beforehand, Frank's also very much interested in sort of the research into the figures and the numbers around property development, and has quite a broad portfolio of works that you're involved with. And you also run a charitable trust, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, about how you help out other people who are in the property development sector. We also have Carmen Vicelich, and lovely to have you here, Carmen. You are an award-winning CEO, founder and global CEO of Valocity, and I do know a couple of members of your team. What a great team you've got, and you're really about harnessing your technology and data to transform sectors, and I'm a big fan of that. I sort of consider that is with data, it's about finding the truth, and truth is very valuable. So I'm also very aware that you're very ambitious and have a lot of new technology that you're launching that is very disruptive in the market, and I look forward to seeing that come through even more. So we're going to kick things off with you, Bill. There'll be an opportunity for each of the speakers to talk for 10 minutes, and then we'll get into a Q&A, and we'll do our best to take some questions from the floor as well. So the floor is yours, Bill.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. One of my main businesses is a family business, which is known as Smales Farm, which a lot of you will know. And it's based on the North Shore. We are very innovative. The whole concept of anything really needs to be innovative if it's going to work. And I think this conference will show a big difference in innovation within New Zealand. I'm also involved in Freedom Villages, which is a different concept for retirement. It's more like a resort, and it's built with individual homes, but on smaller sites under one title, which allows closer builds, but you can have add-on packages. So it's been designed to add, if you want a double garage, a single garage, you buy the base house. There are several styles of homes and different sizes, and you can have different sort of facilities. It's like almost like a kit set, but it's not. So you can buy the pieces and have it put together, and you choose your interior decor, things like that. So for the retirement sector, it caters to around 80% of the market, whereas most retirement villages, the big players, cater for around the 20% of the market. Our houses range from 225 up to about just under 700 for the dearest house, which is 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms and double garage. And they're all architect designed. The layouts are really nice. Grounds are really nice. So with recreational facilities, and it's all about sharing facilities. And I think to get economies of scale in building, I think sharing of facilities is a big thing, going forward. And I can see that in subdivisions. I could see the future of subdivisions having smaller sites. If you had a situation where a bank would fund on one large site, that'd be great. But in a lot of cases, that won't work. So I think where most people come unstuck is the financing. And if you had smaller sections with smaller homes, even for families, provided you provide the recreational facilities, maybe the coffee area, you know, the coffee shop attached to the recreation kids playground where mums could go sit and watch the kids in the playground and have a coffee with the neighbours, or mum with grandma, all that sort of thing can be innovative as developing. And I think you'll find a lot of families, if you look at the practical side of what families really need, in a house they need a decent kitchen. The wife always wants a decent kitchen, maybe 3 or 4 bedrooms, and a decent sort of lounge come open area for dining, and kitchen could all be in an open plan. And that could be done in a modular home very easily, and could be transported to site, and could be placed on a smaller site, but utilizing the playground so that the children can go to a safe area to play. You could have a swimming pool with proper people looking after the pool, and it could be run like a body corporate. I think the model is there for housing. When you look at apartment blocks, for instance, you could use the same concept, but on a 1 level or 2 level designed layout with other facilities with it, running it with a body corporate. And body corporates can be troublesome, as many people know. I live in an apartment block and we have a body corporate, and I'm well aware of how that operates. Our body corporate is very efficient. You've got to be very careful with body corporates, because sometimes the volunteer side become power hungry and they don't listen to the majority. They don't do things for the good of the whole block. So I think there needs to be more regulation around that area, and controlling of funds. Those sort of things need to be resolved in a much firmer way. I'm also involved in IT and IT companies as well, which to me, technology is great in building. I think we need to look at a lot more technology in housing and in facilities around the housing. And it's all about keeping the living costs down. So if you can provide services in bulk to a development and keep the costs down, I think that's a big win as well. So we've got to look at innovation, definitely look at innovation. There are lots of ways to innovate. And I think councils, government, for instance, the government really needs to go back to the 50s. Look how they funded houses in the 50s. The government took the mortgage, all right, and they managed the mortgages and loaned the money over a fixed term. And I think that could also be done in New Zealand. Instead of the government giving the money away like they do, they could secure it against the property with the mortgage and maybe do a term of 10 years to kick the housing market off. And then once the 10-year term comes up, the people have to refinance at that point to the market, which is fine because they'll have gained a lot more equity and they'll be able to fund. And I think these are areas that the government really need to look at carefully. And none of it's really rocket science. It's common sense. And unfortunately, common sense isn't that common. But I think, you know, we have to look at all of these areas. You know, I'm sort of involved in, it's interesting, I'm involved in dog food as well, which has to be innovative. We manufacture and deliver to the door like my food bag, same sort of thing with the recipe, and you make the recipe for the dog. It's a bit of a quirky thing, but it's great. So I think going forward, I think there is a lot of areas where this innovation can take place. I'm just looking at other things. I think around the government definitely need to step up and do a lot more for for funding of homes. I'm a bit lost here. I'm just thinking what else I'm going to say.
That's great, Bill. Listen, you've covered off quite a few things there. I think, the point you've come through with is about financing, and starting off with that. And you're looking at modular housing, urban design, reducing costs through the share model scheme. Trying to reduce those infrastructure costs. So it's wonderful to hear that coming through. Your concerns about body corporates. I live in an apartment too, and but I chair it, so we're fabulous. We're a great
I also
group.
chair mine.
But you also talk about the government's roles around funding and options for equity. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit more about that, or your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, my thoughts around that is it was very effective in the early days, in the 50s and very early in the 50s, basically, when they were trying to roll out social housing. And I think that area, the government have lots of land around that could be done. I think infrastructure-wise is another area where I know if you go too far away from the city, you've got to incorporate sewage, water, but I don't see why we can't go back to we have the technology to purify water from tanks, all right? You have technology today to purify water from sewage on an individual property. And I think sites could be made smaller, but having that technology used in a smaller area on a site with a lot better purification of water. So I think houses could collect the water. We're going through a water shortage. Why can't we have tanks? Why aren't we allowed to have tanks? We could feed our grey water with that. There's lots of areas that we could definitely innovate. And I think the early days, everybody had a tank. And now you don't have a tank. You have to drink the water. Regulation, sometimes we can be over-regulated. And I know we have regulations for a reason, but I do think we are over-regulated in a lot of areas. There are people that will definitely think that you could have a tank. My son's property, he has huge tanks on his, but he's in rural, but there is water supply there, but they don't use it. They just use their own water, and it's all purified, got a proper purification system. So I do think that sort of thing could be done in a bigger scale, even on smaller scale around subdivisions, which would take a lot of the cost out of the council having to pay a lot into a subdivision. You could still run all that, but run it to a set point on site. And then you could have it going into a sewage system later if there was volume, and using this existing sewage system, but utilizing it at different times of the day and night. So in other words, when the load isn't on it, during midnight, the pumping system could be pumping out of big tanks into the sewage system when it's not at mass volume, so that you get to use the existing infrastructure much more efficiently.
Thank you so much, Bill. We appreciate having you here, and really appreciate those comments. It's wonderful to hear you talking about innovation, especially around the infrastructure costs, which is obviously a big part of any development. And we're going to ask a few of those questions, I think, later on in the session. Okay. So I'd love to hand over now the floor to Frank Hsu, who's Managing Director of Shore Capital. And welcome along, Frank.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of our observations and some of the thoughts around what's happening there. I think the moment is a quite interesting period that everyone's going through. Either you are employee or employer, or you're entrepreneurs. The market's in there. I've just got a couple points I want to really share with everyone, just through my personal observation, also through the research. So before I do that, fundamentally, the Shore Capital is a group of business involved a lot of land development, construction, project financings, and we're involved with IT as well. Just through my personal background, I've done banking for more than sort of 13, 14 years. So through that experience, we had a deep connection to the real estate markets in there. Hence, we have been involved in the property-related transactions in there. So I guess a couple of observations we see is a lot of people still sharing lots of data in terms of what's happening right now, and comparing to the late the 1930s or the 1970s, even 08 and 09. Is that really a recession or is a depression? So I guess at the moment we have seen is, the demands in terms of the housing markets in there is still relatively there. The transactions has been dropped dramatically because there's just not enough opportunity for people to interact and make transactions. But just giving an example of the last 2 to 3 weeks in there, we still see a lot of high demands in terms of the affordability housing in the Auckland market, especially in the South Auckland. So there's still people wanting to get into the homes rather than flatting or rentings in there. Because there are some interesting stats where we can see is in there is, if we look at over the last 20 years of the stats in terms of housing inflation versus rental inflations in there, the rental inflation sort of stays around about 5 to 6%, and it hasn't really dropped that much. So we're using standard household family situations. A mum and dad with 2 kids in there, if they want to live in, if they want to rent a house somewhere in Auckland, they'd be paying at least about $650 per week, right? So to enjoy the current low interest rate around about 3% in there, they can easily get into affordable housing somewhere at about $650,000 to $700,000 and paying less mortgage rate with a surplus and paying their own mortgages. So I believe that those amount of people still out there that takes there or there about 30 to 35% of the housing shortage. So going back to the original days and when I was the banker, helping people to buy their first homes, all about the servicings, how much money have you earned, over the period of time, can you servicing the debts in there? So we normally will use almost like a unofficial ratio of the 1 to 6. So if you're earning income, households about $100,000, you probably get a bank $600,000 if you don't carry any other debts in there. So if we do a simple stats in the housing, Auckland housing median price is somewhere about $825,000 thereabouts. Now, household average in Auckland, probably somewhere about 110, 120, mum and dad together or single earner. You go to the bank, you have a little deposit, and you ask the bank to provide your lending on that. If you're buying a house over $1 million in there, you probably will struggle to get a loan approval from the bank. But if you're buying a house somewhere around about 700, 750 by borrowing, 90% of the loan out of that, you'll probably have a decent chance to get into it. And to avoid paying $650 on other bills and for renting and facing uncertainties of a landlords want to sell or any other issues. So I think the shortage is still there. The problem is affordability. To me. So there are people out there, they desperately want to get into housing, enjoy the next 2 to 3 years of low interest rate and paying their own mortgages. But the problem is in the Auckland market, the way we see it is there's not many affordable housing out there. And when people saying affordable housing, people have a different definitions. To me is we're probably looking at the average house income versus how the mortgage was stacked up to make up the actual value of the property. And that to me is the housing. And going back to Bill's point, I absolutely agree. So I think these days, with the new face of New Zealand compared to 20, 30 years ago, people probably need to really realize that, the traditional sort of Kiwi ways have a nice big backyard and bit of grass in there, place in there. They're probably very hard to achieve these days because the Auckland's getting towards the metro cities and standard. So what metro city really means is, you probably will need to accommodate the fact that, you'll be living in the small yards in there, but as long as the facilities are sufficient or adequate. So what that really means is, a smaller house with the good facilities around it should be acceptable. And we could expect the rentals in the Auckland market will go even upper, depends on the population and net immigration. So how do I see the housing markets there? I think overall the pricing, as various economists will predict it, probably going to be a bit of a dip. Either it's double digits or single digits over the next 3 quarters, 4 quarters. I think it probably will. But the question is, what we're seeing is that a U shape or V shape of the economy. if we go back to the 1930s, it's a really depression. You know, the US federals allow the banks to go bankrupted and to shrink to the USDs, you know, by 30%. But currently, you know, what we're facing now is, you know, all the government around the world, including New Zealand, they're doing massive QEs, you know, they're printing monies and you're injecting into the economies in there. And yes, it will take time for all the Australian banks to really give this money to the business owners and to the household. It will take time, but eventually I believe will happen. So what I'm saying is, you know, when we're facing the other upwards of the U-shape or V-shape, we'll probably expect a high boost in terms of the economy, high demand, and etc. So I'm still reasonably optimistic about the short to medium in terms of the housing market, because one is there are enough people looking for house to go. Two is the lower interest rate we're seeing is not going to go away for the next 12 months. It's probably going to stay for even longer period of time. And international standard, I think if we step back, look at all the territories around the world, we're taking all the boxes, right? Nice environment, safe, good people, easy to do business, good clients in there. You probably hard can find any other cities can beat in Auckland. Myself as an immigrant, I come to New Zealand probably 20 years ago, right? So I travel all around the world. You know, sometimes you see a big, nice city, New York and cities of Sydney, the others, and yes, they're cool. But if you tick all the boxes in there to see, okay, am I going to raise my kids in there? I'm going to have a good education, safe environment, everything else. I think Auckland probably top rank in number 1, number 3, in my personal opinion. So what that really means is, you know, we have a 4.5 million population, massive land, a lot of undeveloped resources in there. Yes, the government are still borrowing, you know, to grow the economy. But if you compare the likes of Europe and US in there, government debts isn't that bad as the other countries. Well, in fact, if we go back to the 2008, you know, the household debts comparing to the nowadays has been reduced by 50%. So what that really means, the household these days, the ability to really accommodate the risk we're having is much more stronger than the 2008. So I would expect once the COVID-19 situation gets somewhat controlled over the next 12 months in there, New Zealand is probably going to be a hot spot to attract the talent, a good FDIs in there. Probably government might turn around to change the policies instead of ban overseas investor buy property, and they might introduce stamp duty tax. That's personal. I think we should go. Where the other country do, why don't we go? If we face American billionaires coming here to spend $10 million to build a house in Waiheke Islands there, well, perhaps we'll charge them 5% more to do that. I believe they would do that instead of ban the whole thing. The thing is, you know, if people don't come here to buy properties, it's very hard to attract their wealth over here. And I believe New Zealand is hugely undercapitalized. So that's sort of my 2 cents of view.
Hey, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that, Frank. And I think, you know, I was just mesmerized actually with some of your comments, and I think there's going to be a lot of people nodding their heads, you know, as part of this talk about what you just said. You know, you talked about 30 to 35% housing shortage. Can I also just say it's nice to have someone talking about Auckland. Every guest speaker we've had in the other panels so far have been from Wellington. So it's actually quite nice to have a bit of a talk about Auckland. Sometimes we feel like Auckland's talked about too much. We do have to realise this is a national expo, but it's quite nice to hear about those prices. And, you know, you talked about the debt surfacing and, you know, that debt 1 to 6, you know, of the household income. And, you know, there's quite a lot of international standards around debt financing, you know, that it should represent, you know, a proportion of your salary and that you can actually afford to pay that off as opposed to try and get the banks to fully debt you. And I think, you know, the conversation you've had and Bill have had starts to bring some of those alignments together about lifestyle living and not putting yourself into major debt, you know, to do that. But you also mentioned, you know, the problems with affordability and still the lack of supply. And I assume you're talking, you know, that's around Auckland market. But if you look at household income by location, you find that across the whole of New Zealand. And it's really interesting. I think there is a correlation between land cost and affordability. I don't necessarily think it's the construction side of it, but you see that all across New Zealand, and it's sometimes to do with the bundles of the land or the infrastructure costs. So thank you so much for those comments. We've got some amazing questions coming up, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit more depth. And last but certainly not least, Carmen Vicelich, from the global CEO and founder of Valocity. Wonderful to have you along, Carmen, if you'd like to take the floor.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's probably a good segue to follow on from Frank's discussions around how he sees the market and, really where we see the opportunities and what are we seeing, I guess, in this COVID-19 world and really what's happening. So for those that don't know Valocity well, we connect valuers, brokers, lenders, and consumers and insurers all through our platform to streamline and digitize the mortgage lending process and make it faster and easier. And it certainly is unprecedented times, having the entire market shut down pretty much and freeze for 5 weeks. So obviously our banks are wanting to know, what do we think is going to happen and what is the likely, everybody wants to know, crystal ball gazing. But this is very much unprecedented, going from a really buoyant market in March to suddenly 0 sales and everything being frozen. Normally you can watch a decline and you can see when it's reaching the bottom and flattening out, and then you can start tracking the recovery. We were up here and we just flew down here, and now we're literally in week one of starting to come out. And so we have to look at all the different economic indicators that are going to contribute to what's going to happen. And I guess we're seeing a mix of those two things in terms of positives and negatives. Certainly, in terms of if we look at supply and demand, 0 migration is going to impact us, but it is 0 migration that's obviously going to impact the labour market for construction, and that's certainly negative. And then economic instability and confidence, and we know there's a lot of no confidence in our unemployment figures. Sectors very concerning, and certainly a lot of businesses have been struggling. So that does affect it. On the plus side, we have got quantitative easing, as Frank mentioned. We have very, very low interest rates. And conversely to the GFC, which was a global financial crisis, all our lenders are very well funded. They're open for business. They're doing competitive interest rates. We've seen interest rates as low as 3%. And so all of those things actually contribute to activity and the ability for first-time buyers, potentially, who have been out of the market for so long. I guess, yes, we have an economic crisis and a pandemic crisis, and we have to look at those impacts in our sector. And there's 2 parts to that. Certainly from a health perspective, that has affected how we operate and how we build, and I'll touch on what we're doing there and what we're seeing. And that's certainly going to have effect on the productivity of construction, with new regulations and people having to do distancing and actually add a whole lot of protocols when they're trying to catch up on construction. At the same time, economically, we're going to see, I guess, a really mixed market, because certainly for Auckland, we had a housing shortage. The government said they were going to build 100,000 houses. Last year, we had 16,000 building consents, so we're well short of what we were predicting and what we were hoping for. And we know that's been an ongoing issue. At the same time, demand is not necessarily going to be consistent throughout the nation. And so obviously there's going to be areas like Queenstown, like Rotorua, those tourism hotspots that are being driven, their little micro economy is very much driven by tourism, and obviously those macroeconomic effects that, nothing to do with housing, but around the supply and demand outside of it, are certainly going to impact there. So it's really, I think, going to be important to look at the data and to track what it's telling us and to understand what is actually going on, because we cannot assume, people aren't going to move from Auckland, those retirees that can now finally afford to move to some of those other areas and they're going to buy. We cannot assume that Kiwis that are overseas that recognise New Zealand might be one of the first and only COVID-free places in the world to decide to come home and buy here. We also know that with economic instability, that means people don't want to necessarily invest in the stock market. And we know that property, if you're in it for the long haul, brings long-term capital gain. And you can just look at the data and that's a fact. So I guess we can't make assumptions. We are going to have to look at what is the data telling us, what is the actual facts, and then understand and make decisions based on that and assertions around that. For us as a business, we've been extremely busy, very much innovating into what Bill talks around technology, to work with the ecosystem to see how do we bring continuity. Because we know everything was frozen. We had all these developers trying not to get into their clauses of overdue delivery. Because we do the most valuations in New Zealand, we do a lot of turnkey for construction for residential. And we had a big problem that obviously around the health pandemic, valuers aren't necessarily able to wander around properties, be it a new apartment or be it around an existing one. And so what we've had to create is an alternative solution around that. And so what we've been focused on is migrating to New Zealand a property app called Valocity Connect that we had in India, to actually put that in the hand of the property occupier here, and whether it's the developer or the homeowner or the renter, and allowing them via a phone to take geotagged photographs, timestamp photographs, and click to share them back to the valuer, so that the valuer can actually complete the valuation and that everything can actually continue. And then of course, banks don't just chop and change how they decide and do their decision making. So we've had to work with all of the lenders to also make sure they will actually accept a limited valuation inspection, and making sure we tick all those boxes that the photo is time stamped, and don't worry, that is the finished up-to-date house, and that it is geotagged, it is that apartment or that terrace house. And so even if it's the developer actually having to take those photos and send it through, there's a way that the economy and that the property ecosystem can actually continue to flow and continue to work. And so that's been a big focus for us under the COVID-19, working with our partners and community to make sure we bring continuity. So I guess it is certainly going to be a look and see market, and I guess in terms of construction, it's definitely going to be in development. In terms, it's going to be looking at seeing what is the appetite and what are the opportunities, because there has been a big shortage of affordable land, and that is just an issue. When you have a shortage, it drives up pricing. And you can run a count of residential vacant sections in Auckland. It's not pretty. It's not very pretty. So that's definitely an issue, and we've always battled that we need to go up or we need to go out to understand how we have a growing population and growing housing demands in Auckland. I think the low interest rates mean it's going to be actually potentially more economic to actually buy than it is to rent. And combined with low interest rates. But I guess that the property owners and property buyers and first-time buyers will very much have to understand their personal economic situations, because no one knows what the future will bring. And we've seen in Singapore that they've gone into subsequent outbreaks, subsequent lockdowns. So any decisions need to be for the long term, and not just recognizing the short-term economic interest rates or short-term opportunity, but actually making sure the numbers stack up long-term will be really crucial. So conscious, I can see to the right, lots of questions coming through. So I'll probably end up there and then allow the audience to start asking questions.
Carmen, thank you so much. That was a wonderful synopsis, I think, of what's happening in the New Zealand market. You touched on immigration, and obviously that's a big component. In one of the previous sessions, we were talking about education, especially foreign education, how much that actually contributes to the New Zealand economy. You also talked about the Housing New Zealand shortage, and you talked about the micro market impact, but being affected by these macro events, places like Queenstown. And, I think there's been some market commentary around that as well, just recently. You mentioned the long-term gains within housing has always been there, and there's a lot of data obviously around that. And, it's still more economical to buy, but it depends on your personal situation. And I think those are some really good messages. I've heard about your app. I'm really looking forward to giving it a go as well. I think it would be very useful. It certainly reduce time and the processes, especially around land development, to make these numbers stack up. So we've got a few questions, and we're very happy to take a few questions from the floor as well. So if people just want to type them up and flip them through. So you're all involved in a lot of developments in different ways. How has the COVID-19 lockdown impacted your business?
Well, I could talk there a little bit. With the retirement villages, of course, we've had to lock down our residents. Kind of locked down. They're not quite in jail, but they're almost. So the gates are locked, and people can only enter, staff can enter. We have security at the gate now to take food deliveries. We've implemented a lot of things like shopping, picking up prescriptions. We have staff using our minivans to take people to particular places, to medical appointments, things like that. But the community overall has become a lot more engaged within the community, which is fantastic. I see that as a big positive. We're utilising a lot of the facilities that we have with technology. We've been training people to use Zoom. They've all had to learn to use Zoom. And of course, a lot of them are in between 50 and 90, and the bulk of the residents are above 70. So that's a big learning curve for them. So there's some of the staff been training them how to use Zoom, and now they're connecting with families via Zoom, and they're finding it's quite neat. So it's been a big education process there. As far as Smales Farm goes, we've had to assist tenants, a lot of tenants. We've been assisting tenants with some rent relief, things like that. We're a community, and all our tenants are part of our community. So we have done what we can to assist them, and we'll do so on an ongoing basis. But we're very supportive of those because they're our lifeblood and they're part of the overall family. So we have to look after them. And so that has affected us there. I'm hoping at level 2, the businesses, a lot of them will go back, but I think people are going to think differently about commercial office space. A lot more people are going to work from home. Companies that decided that they didn't like people working from home, CEOs and that sort of thing, I think they will be changing their mind a bit. They'll be looking for smaller space to cut their overheads, and they'll be having staff, a lot more staff working from home on a permanent basis on different types of shifts. So I think there's going to be a big change in the way people think going forward.
I'll probably share a bit of mine, and I guess for our business, there's a plus and a minus. So if I share the plus side of it, I would say we actually, during the COVID-19, 5 to 6 weeks in there, we actually, because we're land developers, we have settled more than 110 lots and during the period of time of the lockdown. So that sort of kept everyone happy, especially the banks in there. And what we also done for our spec builder who buying or individual investors was we actually allow them to defer the settlements and without any penalties. We also helped them with sort of bridging finance if they're required and for the period of time. So that has reached a pretty positive outcome, and everyone's sort of happy in the end of it. The other plus we experiencing is, you know, our staff members overall either involved with construction, project management, rentals and sales in there. They're pretty, I would just say they're pretty focused and very dedicated to what they do. Everyone's sort of working quite efficiently in terms of using online tools to make things through. So, I mean, as a group CEO, I think I felt very privileged to have a team and a good customer surrounding us, trusting us that, you know, and this is the way we're going is really benefiting everybody. So from business perspective, we are not too bad. I mean, over the period of time, we haven't laid any staff members off at all. We haven't reduced any wages at all. So hopefully that will the level 2s and level 1s will kick in sooner, then everyone can back into the business. I guess down to the minor side of it, how the COVID-19 impact from construction point of view, a lot of our projects will have to be pushed into the winter season. When you're dealing with the land developments in the working the winter season Auckland market is very different from in the summer market. Especially on the costs and complexities of that. So I guess we'll just have to really face on that. And some of the engineering designs, and they will probably have to adjust that to make it work. The other sort of minor side from financing point of view is, I think given the COVID-19, either banks or the second-tier lending market there to sort of pull back quite a bit. So a lot of our small to medium project and property developers, they are feeling the pain of that. So a lot of projects that they're about to really go, and they're sort of being pulled by the lenders at the last minute. That has a result a lot of negativities in terms of the business activity. So we felt, and this is probably not going to be a immediate resolving solution, probably going to be another 3 to 6 months until everyone's slowly coming back to the market to fund it. So, and on top of that, I guess, just efficiency. So when you have the programs developed over a projects in there, you kind of stick with it, and hopefully you don't have too many contingencies overrun. But the moment is with limited supplies, laboring, limitation, people working on the site, and your program become a little bit irrelevant. So you have to really work with what you got. So that's what happened to our business.
And Carmen, has your business probably become more productive being a virtual and data-driven one?
Yeah, so we always had flexible working. I'm a mother of 4, and a lot of our people, have the option. It's always been pretty flexible for our team, so it was pretty seamless. We're very much a Microsoft shop, so we use Microsoft Teams, and we actually called the work from home a little bit earlier than the government did, so we were well in the zone, and I think we're kind of felt that we're up to week 8. And I guess, but you see a lot of lessons when you work through periods like this. One of the most things that's been so rewarding to watch is the team. And just seeing how everybody pulls together and works together, and that collaboration has just been incredible, with people, just doing all hours and all things to make things happen. So, and we knew we wanted to have this new technology ready for the market. I think the collaboration has been incredible. So just seeing the ecosystem pull together, and the power of collaborating to actually that's something that New Zealand has as an advantage as a small market, being able to collaborate to make things work and solve problems to move forward. I think, one of the things for us, our team in India is in lockdown, and while we complain in New Zealand, and we know that it's certainly a big issue for our economy to be in lockdown, and it certainly hasn't been nice for many businesses. I think we still also feel so grateful to live where we do, because in India only 8% of businesses are actually structured, and there's so many single street vendors, street businesses, and very small people, small one-man band businesses that just have zero income for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're not allowed to go out for exercise or to get food or any of those things. So I think the appreciation for where we live has never been so strong, to be safe in our bubbles, but also have to be able to live in beautiful green New Zealand. I think the biggest outcome for us in learning through working through this is it's the opportunity to accelerate the adoption of new technology, and recognizing we have to find new ways to solve old problems, because the world has changed, we've changed, how we want to live has changed, and everything around us, the rules have changed. And so, that really probably feeds into everything. It feeds into how government makes decisions. It feeds into how businesses make decisions, and how we as people want to make decisions and live our lives. And certainly as entrepreneurs or business owners, the decisions that we make, and that's all really being accelerated to actually say what's important right now, and how do we move through these uncharted waters. So it's been a huge learning, but I think really a lot of positives come out of it for ourselves.
Okay, listen, unfortunately, that's probably the time, all the time that we've got. I will have David Seymour tuning in very soon, so if you want to watch him, you're more than welcome to come along. There were lots of other questions I'd love to have asked about what you think the government should do in the budget for next year. And certainly thank you for everyone who's been making comments here as well. So just in summary, I would like to thank you so much, Bill Smale of Smale Farms, for coming and joining us. Wonderful to have you here, and especially about the work you're doing in your retirement villages. That's wonderful to hear about how you're helping New Zealand's elderly. Frank, thank you for joining us. Sounds like you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and obviously a lot of balls in the air, and it sounds like you're landing a few, and that's really good to hear, especially in the property and development market. And Carmen, thank you for coming along, and all the best with the launch of your new product. I think that's going to make a big difference in the market, and it's wonderful to have you providing quite a different view as well, very much focused on what could be happening in the different parts of the market, the micro and macro parts of the market. So I really appreciate you for coming along. So on behalf of everybody here at the live virtual Reboot Housing Expo. Really appreciate you being here. We have an amazing group of exhibitors, and I do encourage everyone to go and check those out, go and talk to them. They're from all across New Zealand and represent a really diverse number of different sectors in the market. The Expo is also supporting a charity called Homes for Hope, and and they've got a special offer where you can get a professional photo taken of your family or your bubble by a professional photographer, and you can donate some money towards them, and that goes towards the work they do with foster care, kids in foster. So do check out them also live streaming. And if you want to join the next session, David Seymour will be on in approximately 17 minutes. So do head along there if you'd like to hear from him. He's going to be talking about the future of KiwiBuild following COVID-19, and I'm sure that will be a very enlightened conversation from David's perspective. So once again, thank you, Bill, thank you, Frank, and thank you, Carmen, for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Ciao.
Bye.